Whether you or a friend own a 3D printer, or you have access to a public machine, today I'm going to show you how you can use almost any modern FDM printer to print up your next adventuring party of miniatures, for any of your tabletop games like D&D, Daggerheart, or Pathfinder. You see, my players have just hit level 10, and with such a milestone, and given how much their characters and equipment have changed since their adventure began over a year ago at our table, it was about time for some new minis. But rather than paying for or sourcing resin printing, this time I wanted to print them right at home on my FDM printer. So buckle up, today we're going from model creation, through my setup process, and all the way to a finished tabletop miniature. Let's get into it. First off, to print your character, you're going to need a model. So what are your options? Sure, you can find dozens of amazing miniatures on sites like My Mini Factory, and that is a great choice if you can find one that works. But if you want a mini to truly fit your vision, or to create a character that is entirely yours, then a customizable model from somewhere like HeroForge or Eldritch Foundry are perfect. My personal choice is HeroForge, with their expansive library of fully customizable options. You can choose your model's species, change their height, and then adjust almost every part of them individually, like a very in-depth video game character creator, right down to choosing the perfect weapons, armor, and equipment for your model, and setting them in a pose that expresses who they are. My players are often coming to me with cool new character ideas that are almost always accompanied by a HeroForge model, and as a DM, I often use it to mock up NPCs, even if it's just to slot a reference image into my notes. And then, as campaigns progress, if those NPCs are getting more involved in combat, I can just grab those models and get them printed. And just to mention, this video is not sponsored in any way, shape, or form, I just genuinely really like HeroForge as a tool and recommend you give it a go. Once you have your character mini to your liking, it's just a matter of buying it or using one of their digital credits to download the model. During which, HeroForge offers a great option to thicken up a few of the smaller details, enlarging thin limbs slightly, bulking up weapons, really anything it feels will be tricky to print or easily broken are altered there and then, which is perfect, especially for FDM. And being able to separate the model from the base is also a great touch. And now that we have our model downloaded, we can go ahead and get it ready for printing. Today we're going to be looking at my most recent beginner-friendly pipeline for this, but there are a few different ways you can get these models printed up, and if you are looking for some other options, I do have more videos here on the channel, such as using the slicer-generated FDM tree supports, but these HeroForge models are so dainty that they would need a lot of fine-tuning and likely a few reprints, or I recently showed off using resin pre-supports, bulking them up to work on FDM printers. But of course these HeroForge models don't have pre-supports, and doing resin supports manually would take just as long as fine-tuning the FDM ones, and I do want to keep today's workflow as easy to use and beginner-friendly as possible. So then, what about automatic resin supports? Delicate enough not to ruin our prints, but still a quick and easy automated solution. Sadly, resin slicers do have a history of having terrible automatic support generation, which is where a new, free tool comes into play. BlueprintStudio is the new Hager's resin slicer, designed to work with their closed ecosystem of printers and resins, but the program is free, works offline, and allows us to import and export our models, with some of the best automatic resin support generation I have seen, with just enough customization to get them working on FDM printers. Opening up BlueprintStudio, you will be greeted with a login screen, but don't worry, simply tick this box and you can use it in its offline mode. From here, we will simply create a project. The printer and resin parameters shouldn't really matter for what we're doing here, so just make a selection and head on in. Next step is to drag and drop our HeroForge character or other model of your choice into the workspace. And of course, you can create multiple plates if you want to work on multiple models at once. Now, with our character imported, we have a few things to consider. Firstly, we need to keep in mind that an FDM printer is going to slice your model horizontally. So, to avoid obvious layers, we should make sure the focal point or most detailed area of our character, usually the face, is facing outwards, not up or down. Simply because, on an FDM printer, details are going to look the best on that axis. But we do want to note that any overhangs are going to need support material, and in this default orientation facing directly outwards, that means our character's chin and nose might end up needing supports, which could make those focal areas look less than perfect after printing. And furthermore, I have found that it can be tricky for FDM printers to print large flat panels directly on these resin style supports. So, at this default orientation, areas like the soles of the shoes could also be a problem. Luckily, both of these issues can be resolved by tilting the character back by 10 to 20 degrees. This tilts the chin and nose to such an angle that they won't need supports, as well as makes the bottom of the shoes slanted and easier for the supports to do their job. And on top of all that, by tilting the character backwards, we're actually helping to focus those supports on the character's back rather than their front. So a lot of the imperfections caused by supports will be on parts of the character we won't often be looking at. Now that we have our model oriented, we can select the mini and come up to the automatic supports. After a fair amount of testing, which I continued even after printing these models you're seeing today, these are the settings I have come up with and that have given me by far the best results. A good amount of strength during the print while still being easy to remove and clean up. That said, if you're having trouble with these supports not being strong enough, or being too strong, you might want to have a play with the connection diameter. Maybe bumping it up to 0.3 if you want slightly stronger supports, or taking it down to something like 0.22 if you want weaker ones. And once you're happy with that, just hit generate. It's worth noting that all of this testing has been done with 0.2mm nozzles, both on the Neptune 3 Pro, which is what we'll be printing on today, but also on the Bambu Lab A1. But more about nozzles later. 9 times out of 10, these supports are great as they are, but sometimes you might want to add an extra support or two to more critical areas. For me, that meant adding another couple of connections to this elbow where the print plumes out quite fast. And of course you can also delete supports if you feel they're unnecessary. Then if you have decided to add or remove any supports, I recommend clicking Optimize Trunks. This just lets the support structures fix themselves up a bit. And finally, once you're happy with the supports, click on your model and come up to Export STL. Now, at this point, you could totally bring this supported file into your slicer as it is. Select your highest quality print profile for a 0.2mm nozzle and fire away. However, printing files supported in this way on an FDM printer as they are can lead to some pretty intense print times. Luckily, there is a way that we can tell our slicer to print these support structures slightly less detailed with slightly thicker layers and slightly faster speeds. But in order to do that, we first need to separate these supports from our model. Just to quickly interrupt here, if you've made it this far through the video and you've found it interesting or helpful, consider subscribing down below. It really helps the channel to grow so that tutorials like this can reach more people. Alright, back to it. Now, this next step does take our beginner-friendly process and make it a little bit more intermediate level, as we will be opening Blender, but not to worry, because this will be a pretty simple process as far as Blender goes. This step uses a tool that I have created called Resin to FDM. Originally, this tool was created to bulk up resin pre-supported files to be more like what we've just created in Blueprint. But that's not the tool's only function, as it also allows us to separate these supports out from our mini to treat them as a separate object. I'll leave a link to the full installation tutorial up here, which will show you both how to get Blender up and running, as well as how to install this tool if you do want to try and go through this process. Once Resin to FDM is installed and good to go, we can go ahead and clear the scene, then bring in our supported model. We will only be using a handful of these features here today, starting with split by loose parts. This will pull the model apart from the supports we just created, leaving us with hundreds of little connectors. Next, we need to left-click on our miniature to select it, and press Assign Miniature. This will group any parts you have selected, and rename them as the miniature, and then take all of the other little support pieces in the scene, and group them together as our supports. And finally, we just need to hit Generate Level Cube, which will help to keep the mini where it needs to be once we're in our slicer. Now just use the Export Miniature and Export Support buttons, saving both parts somewhere on your PC. And I always make sure to call these something like Hero Mini and Hero Supports, so that we can tell them apart later. Easy enough? Great, let's continue. But before we jump into slicing, I do quickly want to cover some hardware stuff. When it comes to printing miniatures, you're going to want a 0.2mm nozzle. Most printers come standard with a 0.4, which is great, but won't capture as much detail as a 0.2. And a 0.4 might not be fine enough to connect these delicate supports to our model. Today I'm going to be using my trusty old Elegoo Neptune 3 Pro with a 0.2 nozzle, but I have also recently used these same settings and process on the A1 with even better results. And I've even gotten comparable results with a 0.25mm nozzle on another printer that you'll probably be seeing on the channel sometime next week. When it comes to filament, I do really like the Bambu Labs basic PLA, and specifically I use the turquoise a lot. It has a slightly softer, semi-matte finish, which I find makes for really easy support removal as it doesn't cling as tight as some harder, more glossy PLAs. But I do also really like working with Elegoo standard PLA as well. It clings a little tighter, but does make for slightly stronger prints. But of course, use what you have or what you know. These are just my recommendations. Today I'll be using OrcaSlicer here because I prefer the results I get, but this process should be identical in BlueprintStudio, Elegoo's Slicer, or Orca FlashForge, really any of the Orca framework slicers. For my print settings today on the Neptune 3 Pro, I'll be using the print settings I outline in this video, which are also available as direct profile downloads for all of my Patreon members. The Painted for Combat Patreon is the reason I'm able to keep making videos, so if you do like what I do and are able to support the channel, consider checking it out. Where, at the Primer tier, you get access to the Patreon exclusive Discord, which is home to my printer profile downloads, and at the higher tiers we have monthly FDM friendly bases, like this month's release, the Tailed Township, a set of sculpted wooden floor bases with a plethora of basing bits, from crates, barrels and bags of gold to spell effects and potions, perfect to show off your D&D character or NPCs. As always, these bases are designed to print completely support-free on FDM printers, and where possible have flat top faces to help minimize the visible layer lines. As always, a huge thank you to everyone over on the Patreon, and a special thanks to my Painted for Display members. Everyone's support over there means so much to the channel. Alright, back to it. With our slicer open on a blank project, I'm going to find those STL files we exported from Blender, and here I will select both of these models and drag them in together, making sure to click yes on this pop-up to import them as a single object, which will make sure that they are aligned correctly. Once they're imported, we can come over to the Objects tab, where we can see our two objects grouped together. From here, we can right-click and come down to Split, Split to Objects. This will separate these two parts back out into individual pieces, but still keep their correct positions relative to one another. From here, we can select our Supports object, and with these split away from the rest of our model, we can now alter the settings on these separately. As my profile for the Neptune 3 Pro has the layer height set to 0.08, I will set my supports to 0.16, so they're only printing every second layer. I will set their wall loops down to 2, infill density to 0, and to further speed them up, I will actually speed them up, heading over to the Speed tab and bumping all of these speeds up to 50mm a second. If you're concerned about these delicate supports breaking, or you've had issues with them breaking during a print, I would maybe recommend slowing down the outer wall speed on these supports, maybe to something like 35 or 40, just to be safe, but I've never really had any issues with them at 50. Coming back over to the Process tab, just to double check that you have FDM supports turned off, and now we can slice. As you can see, the supports are now only printing every second layer using thicker lines, and are printing faster than the Mini itself, meaning that the just over 6 hour print we would have had, by speeding up the supports we have knocked that time down to just over 4 hours. So off to the printer she goes. These models printed here did have their support connection diameter slightly thicker than I recommended to you earlier, as I was still dialing in my values at this point, and yet they still came off pretty easily. So removing these supports with the settings I mentioned earlier should make this part a breeze. Of course, as I said before, you might still need to play around with these values a little bit to get them working perfectly for your printer, but this should be a great starting point. After pulling the supports off, using a knife where needed to be gentle on the model, I did a little bit of cleanup with an X-Acto blade and some files. And after repeating these steps a few more times, getting a couple of other heroes designed, supported, sliced and printed, we have a full party of adventurers ready to hit the table. If you're interested in seeing me paint up some of these heroic level 10 miniatures with what I think are some of my best paint jobs to date, you can check out this video that just dropped over on my D&D group's channel, Roll for Adventure. These heroes are from our current campaign, where we are now 50 sessions deep into a narrative-heavy game about demons, devils, and city politics. If you've made it this far in the video, why not drop a comment down below? Let me know if you're thinking about giving this process a go, and if you do, let me know what the results are like. Or even just let me know a little bit about your D&D character or current campaign. Like if you liked, and subscribe to stay up to date with all sorts of FDM printing and tabletop related videos here on the channel. But most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.